Moderate. Oh, thank you. And so moderating the event this afternoon, I'm pleased to introduce Pierce McBride, who's the lead developer at Amebous Labs. Pierce earned his bachelor's degree in game and interactive media design in 2014 from DePaul University, and he got his degree in digital media at Georgia Tech in 2018. And so prior to joining Amebous Labs, he worked at Disney Publishing Worldwide, Moxie, and Futurus. And so Pierce and Annie are going to be discussing their backgrounds and the journey to building these two tech companies, Annie's insights into the Atlanta VR and AR business world, and the launch of her new AR game, Loam, the expansion of VR and AR into non-traditionally tech spaces, and then the future of VR and AR in business. And so with that, I'm pleased to turn it over to Pierce.
Thank you. So hello, my name is Pierce McBride. As you mentioned, I'm the lead developer at Amebous Labs. And like Annie also, I graduated from Georgia Tech. I think that's a pretty good covering of all of the work that I got into right before I started at Futurus. But we'll get into this more when throughout the course of the discussion, but Futurus and Amebous Labs have like an interesting relationship because I was originally hired just to do augmented reality software development at Amebous Labs, or at Futurus, but didn't exist yet. But over time, the technologies and some of the, I guess I'd say the business climate changed, and it made some of my past experience useful for Annie in a kind of serendipitous way, semi-serendipitous. Again, the technologies are more similar than you might realize. And only last year did I officially transition to being full-time lead developer at Amebous Labs. So we're still in this sort of bit of transitionary phase, I'd say, where we're starting to actually get the ground running on a separate entity just doing game development, and then another entity sharing resources doing all the client work that Annie is a hand in both pots. But more about Annie, because this is what we're here for. So as you mentioned, Annie graduated from Georgia Tech with a BS in International Affairs and Modern Languages in 2010. About 4 years after that, in 2014, she founded Futurus and Amebous Labs in 2020. It's an interesting year to do that. Annie is also involved in the XR and software development community. She founded XR Atlanta, a meetup group here in Atlanta for XR developers, business people, anybody working in the XR space. And she's heavily involved with the Women in Technology meetup group as well, which is a support network for women working in technology. And as a side note, she's also an accomplished composer. If you play Loam, you might actually hear some of her work. That one's not a joke, by the way. How's it sound, Annie?
That sounds awesome. And actually, yeah, he is telling the truth. I have played piano since I was 4. And when we needed music for Loam, I took it upon myself to kind of start making some temporary tracks, and then they turned into permanent tracks. And now you can hear my music and my compositions throughout the gardens of Loam, but we'll get into the process of that initiative later. Thank you so much, Pierce. That was such a nice introduction. And I know, as he said, this event is supposed to be about me, but I'm so thankful that Pierce agreed to be moderator for this, because he truly has a fantastic technological mind and really has been fantastic at adapting to all the craziness that goes along with working at a small business, especially one in the emerging technology space. And it's been an honor to see him continue to evolve, not both on the technical prowess, but also as now a manager and a leader, basically leading the development at a completely new company. So giving a shout out to Pierce, because he's going to do a great job, and I could not have asked for someone better to not only represent my company, but also Georgia Tech. Plus he has a master's degree, so he's way smarter than me, but that's okay. So because of that, I did want to give him the opportunity to kick us off with actually the overview of AR, VR, XR, and then we'll get more into the case studies and how I've been able to apply that to the business. But I would love for him to kick us off with a technical description so that everyone can have kind of a base level understanding of the differences and similarities between those technologies.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. As I've been taught many times in design classes, jargon and acronyms are like your enemy. So I'm saying AR, VR, XR all over the place. So just as a basis of terms, AR, it stands for augmented reality, which means digital content overlaid onto the real world, usually through a phone, like 9 times out of 10. Think about it like a digital character standing in the room with you. Pokemon Go, if you're familiar with it, might be the most well-known use case. VR stands for virtual reality, which is more like the inverse of AR. So your senses are totally covered up by a virtual environment instead of the other way around. That is usually done through a headset, with the Oculus Quest probably being the most famous version of that. So when you put the headset on, you just see this virtual environment and nothing else. XR is a bit of a muddied term, in my opinion. It technically stands for mixed reality, but it's more commonly used to mean both. And that's how we tend to use it when we say XR. We mean just both. Sometimes, specifically, mostly Microsoft, when they say it means you might see a mixture of AR and VR content at the same time, usually through some kind of like pass through or overlay like screen. They call their HoloLens XR, for example. But for the purposes of this conversation, if we say XR, we just mean both. And there's probably a reason for that, because both of these technologies were built for years and years prior, through research into image edge detection, stereoscopic rendering, motion tracking, etc. But I would say Apple and Oculus probably have the biggest hand in the two technologies. Apple's AR Kit API, launched in 2017, was probably the sort of point at which AR technology was available both to developers and to people at a mass scale, obviously because Apple has a huge user base. And they did a lot of the heavy lifting with AR kits, an underlying API, or essentially a bit of code built into the operating system that anybody can use as long as they build for Apple. And then on the VR side, Oculus's launch of a kickstarted prototype in 2012 probably was the thing that actually kicked off VR for commercial uses. It took a while for the Quest to get around to that point and really actually be popular with the masses instead of as a niche industry, but it's also actually the place where I first interacted with it. I actually did prototyping on the very first Oculus Quest DK1, their first prototype in 2012 at DePaul in my undergrad. So I've been doing this for a little while, and then found my way into Futurus. And Futurus obviously was running strong by 2018 when I graduated. So I wasn't there from the start, and I wasn't even technically originally hired just to do VR development. But as a thing that you'll learn more and more when you hear us, the technologies are interrelated. Annie, do you want to talk a little bit about Futurus's origin story?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was lucky enough to also experience the DK1, which is that Kickstarter headset, around the same time as Pierce, maybe a year later in 2013. But that really is what caught my attention as well. It's a device that is seemingly affordable compared to the tens of thousands of dollars you'd previously have to spend for something that wasn't as good. So yeah, I feel like even though we both got into it around the same time, it was for very different reasons. It's kind of cool to see that evolution over the years. But going back as far as Georgia Tech and my graduation from there in 2010, I had no idea I was going to get into this. I ended up taking a role at a company that did international like HR and staffing placement in power plants all around the world. As an international affairs major, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do with that. I had actually thought about being a teacher for a while, but ended up working at a company doing marketing, and I really loved that. And I was actually introduced to virtual reality, that headset, in 2013 by a coworker. While we were working there, he was actually a Kickstarter backer, and he had it in his possession and brought it into the office. And I was one of the only people that got excited about it. And that is a shame, but it ended up turning out to be a really great opportunity, because we spoke to my boss and wanted to pitch it as a way to do power plant walkthroughs for our brand, and trying to do it not only for familiarizing people with that type of environment, but also showing that we could train people in new ways, because training was a big piece of the staffing business I was a part of. So that in theory sounded great, but in actuality, the company decided they did not want to invest in it at the time. It was too early. No one was doing it. I mean, like, those are all the reasons I wanted to do it. And so I decided to look elsewhere. And one of those places I looked was actually at Oculus. I was interviewing to be their communications manager during the Facebook acquisition. And while it was moving along really nicely, I actually got to meet some of the founders and everything. They put a complete hiring freeze on hiring any new talent. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll do something that's adjacent in the meantime while they're figuring out what they're going to do. And so that is when I started the meetup group that Pierce mentioned earlier, XR Atlanta. It was only VR focused at the beginning, and then we absorbed the Microsoft HoloLens meetup, and we had to broaden our name. But that organization now has over 1,500 members, and events every couple of months, not as often as we used to, but it's grown into a great community. We also have a Women in XR group. There's a group called XR Dojo within it that does kind of group-based learning and projects on people's free time to be able to work and grow those skills when not jobs like the people who work for me aren't really available to everyone who wants to have them. So since there aren't that many companies around here doing this, it gives them an opportunity to grow their skills in a personal way. And from there, it really kind of snowballed into a business. I was not expecting it. I really just wanted to meet people who had like-minded thoughts, but because I guess I had established myself as this community organizer and really passionate about the technology, people started coming to me asking how their businesses could utilize virtual reality. And because my current employer said, no, we don't want to do that, I thought, well, someone else does. And so I ended up actually quitting that job, just working contractor marketing jobs in the meantime to pay bills. And Jill, actually, who organized this, knew me during that time. So she probably remembers way back when this was. But I ended up being able to eventually grow into having bigger and bigger projects. It started with just consulting and education work, and then people wanted prototypes. So I went out and found developers who could help me with that. And really the person who introduced me to VR at that company all those years ago was my original co-founder of the business. And he helped me grow kind of some of the technical arm of the business while I would work on business development and marketing. For any of the people on here who are entrepreneurs, I have found that most of the companies that I see fail are the ones where the founder is so stuck in the work that they can't run the business and grow the business. And so by having someone else who could help with the development work, I was able to be freed up to keep putting us out there and keep growing the brand and recognition and getting those projects. So it ended up being a really good balance at the beginning. And then eventually we grew into being able to make full-time hires. And that happened with projects with great companies like Georgia Pacific was actually one of our first big clients. They're actually still a client now, and that was probably 6 or 7 years ago. So we've been lucky to do great work enough to where the clients want to keep working with us and keep expanding their XR talents. And I guess that's really how Futurus came about. I know we'll get a little bit later into Amebous Labs, but we're still completely bootstrapped. We were able to reach the 7-figure mark in year 4. So it did take a while to kind of get up and running to where we could support full-time staff and health benefits and all of that. One of my proudest things as a small business owner is that finally we offer a 401k, and anyone else who owns a business knows that's a really big deal. I'm sure Pierce likes it. So yeah, it's really continuing to grow, and not thanks to the pandemic, but because of the pandemic, people really are putting an emphasis on the power of virtual, both learning and collaboration. And so I think that's been helpful for people to really understand the power of what we do.
Fantastic. And what kinds of projects, maybe it'd be good to just sort of cover the kinds of projects and clients too that like Futurus tends to get, use cases as well.
Yeah. So again, we do both virtual and augmented reality, which Pierce already explained the difference of. So on the augmented reality side, we really are doing mostly phone and tablet-based content. While wearables do exist, we've done a couple of prototypes with Music, smart glasses, and Microsoft HoloLens and Magic Leap. None of it has really expanded beyond prototyping, and I still feel like there are some limitations to that type of hardware to make it really adopted, unless you're in a really, I guess, industrial setting that's using that for heads-up display for some sort of technician activity or medical activity. So we've found some really good opportunities, and most of them revolve on the augmented reality side around product visualization. So being able to see a 3D model of a product placed in your physical space, but through the pass-through of your phone. So even if any of you have used IKEA Place app, or there are a few out there, I know Wayfair and Amazon have some AR capabilities. If you're placing a 3D model of something you want to buy, maybe it's a chair or a lamp, that is using AR for product visualization. There's a really big customer we've been working with for years now, JLG, which makes large construction equipment, mostly aerial lifts and telehandlers, which if you're in construction, you probably know what that is, but think cherry pickers. They have trouble finding out, or their customers have trouble understanding like which machines are going to reach to where I need, what's going to fit through this door. So we worked with them to bring, I think now it's almost 200 machines from their product library into augmented reality. And another thing to note is when you place it through the phone app, it actually places at the size and scale that it would be in the physical world. So it's really great for planning purposes if you need to know if something's going to fit or be right for the job. Now, an app, of course, is a barrier to entry, and downloading an app is difficult to do unless there's a really great purpose for doing so. So there, also on the augmented reality side, is something called Web AR, and we work actually quite a bit now with Web AR. We've got a couple of projects in progress and have deployed a few, but this is where you can just go to a web browser. You can, scan a QR code or click a link, go to that landing page. Allow access to the camera just directly through the web browser and place an item with that web AR experience. No need to download an app anymore. And it's fantastic if you're doing like a marketing engagement or something that's more short-term or very simple. So just seeing one product in front of you. Everyone's like, why don't you always use Web AR? There are limitations with the interactivity. So if you want to have a lot of different interactive options within the experience, that may not be the best fit, but it's definitely a lower price point. It's a great entry point into getting an augmented reality experience aligned with a brand. And we've seen it grow in popularity. It's also becoming a more stable experience. So I'm really happy Web AR is starting to catch on. And then when we go to the virtual reality side, we've done a couple different things, but really architecture visualization. So being able to stand in a huge development project without actually having broken ground yet is something that we did. There's a project with Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. If any of you are in the Atlanta area and have driven by the North Druid Hills exit, you'll see there's a huge building that is going up right off of that exit. That's actually the new 70-acre Children's Healthcare of Atlanta campus. We started working with them in early 2020 to basically take the renderings from the architects and bring them and optimize them in VR. And they were able to use those to not only make some design decisions and approvals towards the end of the design phase, but also to use as a fundraising tool. And thus far, they have raised over $650 million with an M. Their goal is $1 billion. So they're getting there. And something that was even cooler is that we were able to make a custom version of the experience with the Arthur M. Blank Hospital naming all over it, so that before that $200 million check was signed, that there was so much press about a year ago, the Family Foundation was able to see what it was going to look like and stand in the Great Lawn and look up and see his name on the building. So it can definitely go a long way for approvals and really standing and experiencing that environment before it exists. But it can also really kind of like hit you in the heart when you're like seeing that emotion of, oh my gosh, my name is on a huge hospital. We're going to help so many kids. Like having that emotion and being able to live in it through VR is really important. And the last example I'll give is training. So with virtual reality, you're able to simulate so many things. You can really stand in a space, be present in a space, like I mentioned with the children's project, but you can also perform activities. And so one way that we're also using this with a very large manufacturing client is to bring safety training and making sure that there's an opportunity to go through these motions before you're actually put in harm's way and really get comfortable with safety processes on a job site. And hopefully the ultimate goal is to reduce any serious injuries on the job site. So there are so many different ways to use it. That was just four examples, but as you can probably hear in my voice, I'm so excited about all the different ways you can use this technology.
Absolutely. And one thing that I've mentioned a few times and is true about about 3 of those use cases, 4-ish, that all of them are built under the same underlying technologies, like 3D real-time rendering. And 3 of the 4, AR product visualization, VR architectural visualization, or VR training, all 3 of those actually are potentially best suited for the same tool, like the same development environment. In this case, video game tooling, video game technologies, usually engines. That's the main reason why we were able to hire the people that we do and make the transitions we do and work on the projects that we do, is that, and why I'm actually working at it here now, because all of these technologies required needing rendering 3-dimensional imagery, 2-dimensional content, et cetera, on a 2D screen. And that's mostly significant because prior to this point, most of the time, if you're making some sort of B2B software or just a piece of software, an application, et cetera, 9 times out of 10, you didn't need to render 3D. It'd be a waste of your time. To be confident. At most, you need text on a screen and a command line, or at least you need text and a command line. At most, you might need a 2D UI with some buttons. But when you're rendering in 3D space, and I can turn my head and look at different things, or I can turn my phone and look at different things, I need a lot of backing technologies that were pioneered for mostly advanced, I would say, by games. And most of those underlying APIs are easiest to interact with when paired with gaming technologies. Now, this kind of leads to another potentially interesting question. Why didn't Futurus make games until 2020?
That is a good question.
Yeah.
So there are a few factors. Earlier on, I actually myself wasn't too into gaming, and part of that was just because of my upbringing. My parents didn't really let us play video games growing up. But doesn't that always make you want to play them more? No, so it really didn't click for me as a business opportunity, whereas now looking back on it, I'm like, it's a huge business opportunity. But yeah, initially I saw a direct path to making money. And as an early on entrepreneur, small business owner, like you got to have money to survive. So really the customers that we were talking with, gaming was like a big no-no word in those meetings. If we would ever expose, and it wasn't really like a secret, we just wouldn't really talk about it. If we were ever to talk about how these training simulations or these visualization projects were built on gaming technology, a lot of the people we were working with, which the approvers for this would be like VP and higher level, older people typically at large enterprise organizations or global nonprofits, they would just be like, I don't want anything to do with it. That's not professional. That's not what we want to be doing. So I would just omit it from my vocabulary. And early on, I used to kind of talk about how it was built on the same technology because I thought it was a cool connection. And after being in those rooms and having people tell us, no, we don't want anything to do with it because of that, I just kind of took it out. However, it did end up, I guess, turning into a good thing because we ended up getting enough work to then fund a game studio. And now those same clients who we've done like those architectural visualization projects for, have actually approached us about also making a game for their brand. So the ones who understand it now kind of think of it as a good thing, and I'm not really shy about it anymore. But definitely early on, it would get me walked out of the room with no dollars attached to that conversation. So I guess that's the big reason why we didn't do it at first.
And I think one of the more important factors that like flipped that switch too was the Quest specifically. I'd say around 2012, this was a pretty niche piece of technology. And even up until the Quest release in 2019, it was the original Quest 1, not the one that you're seeing ads for. The one you're seeing ads for came out in 2020. Prior to those points, like this was expensive technology.
Mm-hmm.
Like the headset itself cost hundreds of dollars. Then that sets aside whether or not the external sensors that you need to install somewhere, or at least put on your desk, the computer that you need to plug it into, which costs probably minimum $1,000, more likely more than that at the time, still now. And you need to connect it to a wire. And on top of that, you need enough space to actually even utilize it. For a while, like unless you had a room, about the size of a living room that you could like stand in and move around in, then you wouldn't be able to use it, which is also a detriment if you might live in a smaller space. All of this was highly limiting to the number of people and the kinds of people that actually would use VR. The Quest, however, is roughly $300, and that's it. It just works. It works in any room. Doesn't matter whether or not the room that your computer is in is big enough. It doesn't matter whether or not you're using it outside on a porch, inside on a carpet in your bedroom, etc. It works. And you can see it in the numbers. The Quest has sold over 10 million units at this point and has seen over 100 million in content sales. It's still growing and growing at a steady pace. It's selling better than any other headset on the market for all the usability reasons and all the cost reasons that I just talked about. That was probably the biggest reason why we ended up going for the Quest, but that wasn't quite the only reason, right, Annie?
Yeah.
What else happened in early 2020?
Yes, before the world ended. Yes, we ended up having an opportunity that came to us kind of out of nowhere. I had a friend we had both gone through this women's entrepreneurship program together. Well, not together, but the same program, different years. And she knew what we were doing. And she had a friend who worked at Oculus who was on the lookout for women-owned studios, which there are very few of. Well, especially VR. There's more gaming, women-owned gaming studios than VR-specific women-owned gaming studios. So they are a little bit tricky to find, but we were introduced by this mutual friend. And when I had the first meeting with our contact at Oculus, she was pretty much like, we know we have a problem with imbalance in, I guess, gender diversity in their consumers. And so they thought if they find more women to produce the content, that perhaps it would be content that women would buy a headset for. And so we're like, okay, well, yeah, that might be true, but we're not a game studio. She's like, well, if you did make a game, we would basically give you engineering support as well as hardware, which a lot of the distributors sometimes do. We've gotten it before from HTC Vive, although that was more hardware focused. The engineering support was probably more exciting to me because their documentation is not great. Pierce can attest to that. So having a real person that we can bother and schedule calls with and be like, we can't figure this out, can you please help us, was very appealing at the time. They also had kind of said that depending on the product, they will sometimes fund the last maybe 30% of the project, but we ended up not taking advantage of that piece of it. But they also had said they would help us kind of expedite our acceptance into the store whenever a product was ready, which is always great to hear as a game studio. So because distribution can be very difficult, especially if you're on an exclusive platform. So we ended up starting to think of ideas on what we could do. And it's funny, and I have a picture of it. I wish I had it ready. I could share it with you all. The day before I left for a conference, which ended up getting closed early because of the pandemic, and then we never saw each other in the office again for months and months. The Friday before that, we had a meeting as a group, as a whole company, talking about like, if we made a game, what would it be? And it's like this insane, crazy whiteboard of all these things. I think we had one that was like bad tattoo removal game and like hair salon game and like all these fun, quirky games. And we ended up going through a much longer process, but we had a few options, and the Oculus people were great in kind of advising us on, oh, well, maybe don't do this theme because there's a big competitor that's already working on something like that. Like they couldn't give us too many details, but they did give us some kind of guidance on what not to do, which, sometimes can be more helpful than what to do. And we ended up settling on gardening, which was fantastic because so many of my team members are also gardeners. And we started producing Loam. There were a lot of lessons learned. We don't even have time to get into all of those. As a first-time game producer, like I feel like I learned more in 1 year than I learned in probably the 7 other years that I've run my business. But it made us absolutely stronger as a team. It gave us the opportunity to invest in ourselves in a product that would be our own creatively. Everything else has been for a client. So being able to produce something that was truly our own was very special. And it also allowed us to start getting recognition for this and get interest from other people. And we're already working on our second game. So that's exciting. But Loam came out on Oculus App Lab, which we ended up deciding to go an early access route just because of balancing all the things we had going on to really get some good solid feedback from consumers before we completely went headfirst into one direction. But I'm really happy with how it turned out. And we had someone last week tell us, I'm obsessed. So, you can't ask for anything better than that. But yeah, that's kind of how the Oculus thing happened.
Yeah. And a lot of this took place in early 2020 as well, which, I mean, we've danced around it a little bit. That was a hard time for small businesses. How are you navigating that? What was happening at the time? The pandemic. Yeah. I don't know. It's
yeah. I mean,
it will not be named.
Right. There are a few things, I guess, that ended up thank goodness, working out for us. We had a very good Q1 that year and had sold basically what would be a whole year of normal work in that January 2020. And then we already had teed up more work, literally like working. I don't know if anyone from Delta's on here, but we were talking like about a 7-figure project with Delta in March 2020. That didn't happen. That did not happen. We had a few others with like big companies. And of course, all these big companies were having to do massive layoffs. They're not going to invest in emerging technology that they don't need right now. So we were so fortunate that we had that good Q1 to carry us through the rest of the year. But we had planned on scaling, and like that work was not going to take my entire team's full capacity for the year. And so that is one of the reasons we had the money and the time to do this. We didn't have to do layoffs. And we did also take advantage of the Georgia entertainment tax credits. We spun out an entirely new entity because if anyone's familiar with those tax credits, they have to be done on a qualifying entertainment production company, which has to do over 50% entertainment production. The rest of our client work does not fall into that category. So Pierce is one of them. He had to send a letter of resignation to Futurus, and then I rehired him at the other company. So I told him, trust me, Pierce, trust me. But yeah, we transferred some people over that were going to be working on the game more focused, and then really just tried to balance our time with the projects that were left and making sure we were fulfilling those, and then putting a lot of our additional efforts into coming up with something of our own. But yeah, we were very lucky. Like I absolutely every day think of how grateful I am that we were able to make it through that year and stay in business and not have to do layoffs, because just being in the entrepreneurial community, so many of my friends did not have that same luxury. But I'm really glad we were able to take that opportunity and turn it into something great, because I don't know that we would have given ourselves the time to do it otherwise. And I'm really happy we did. Now I just want to invest in gaming. So I'm glad we were afforded that time to do so.
Yeah. And I think I mentioned this a few times, but it's probably useful to say it again. Part of the reason that even that project we were able to do that project is because basically almost every developer at the time that we'd hired had a direct experience in game technology or game development specifically. It's again, because like these underlying technologies are quite similar to literally similar to each other, the same tooling. We use an off-the-shelf game development engine called Unity. Another common one is Unreal, but functionally almost any game development engine or development environment is capable of doing, almost all of them are capable of doing 3D real-time rendering, and most of them have some form of VR plugin. That is the industry standard way of constructing these systems, unless you're making a very bespoke, specific thing that you don't need that kind of hand-holding and help from. And a lot of these programs solve these hard problems for you. Like, you'd be surprised how much you can do without writing a single line of code. That being said, having a deep understanding of the underlying technologies makes a difference in the fine-grained details, I would say, is one thing that we learned working on Loam. But you would want to hire for that kind of experience, that kind of expertise, game development or 3D real-time rendering development. But you can do quite a lot with not a few people. One simple example, 360 rendering, or just rendering a single like 360-degree photo image. You could make that without code. You might have a little difficulty doing it if you never used Unity before, but you could do it. So all being said, it's been a couple years, but nearly two, since Amebous Lab launched. What does it look like today?
Yeah. So we again do have some people now full-time on Amebous Labs, which is not how it started off. And I know that that's been very helpful for you as one of them to not have to kind of be pulled back and forth.
Yeah.
We knew if we were going to grow it, we couldn't just keep pulling people back and forth. So I think that's a strong business decision that we had to make, and I'm glad we did. Also, as I mentioned, Loam launched 2 weeks ago. So it's called Loam Sandbox, and you can see it on Oculus Quest. It will have the App Lab designation on it, but anyone who does buy it will get all the updates. If you've ever bought an early access game, you know there are some things that are still being worked out, but we've been trying to stay transparent with our community and have a public Trello board that has kind of the next features to be iterated, as well as player feedback, and you can upvote things that you want to prioritize. And so we're getting that moving. Really, it's a new thing. We've never had to market a consumer product before, so that's also something we're learning how to do. But it's a great learning experience, and a lot of these learnings we are putting into our next game, which again is in development right now. And I hope that some of the people on this call who are interested will follow us, so that once we do announce it, or we do a call for play testers, you all will be involved. But because of learning all these lessons, I'd like to share one of mine, and then hopefully Pierce can share one of his as well. Something that we, I guess, did, I will say, kind of wrong early, really just wasted a lot of time is, and part of this is because we did this during the pandemic, where we all wanted to have something positive to look forward to. It was that we had kind of a design by committee mentality. And part of that is because we weren't doing it for a client. There was no one really to say no besides me. And of course, I don't want to make people upset when they're all upset in their homes already. So we try to be as collaborative as possible, but I realized we were overly collaborative, and decision making suffered because of it. And our timeline was massively extended. So I think that's something we've definitely learned this time, is to have more structure, especially in the decision making process. But Pierce, I'd be interested to hear what your number one lesson learned from Loam was.
Oh, it's very related, actually, because mine is I think me also undervalued the importance of production timelines and process. Essentially all the work that goes into the producer role, essentially the project manager role. Before this point, I had only ever been a designer on games or a developer on games. I had never actually managed a project myself. And in the same vein of we didn't have somebody looking over us, we didn't have a client, we didn't have stakeholders, exactly just ourselves. We didn't really put down a strict or even semi-strict production process or timeline. And that, I think, hurt us as well. Even if you're doing something on your own, you should set deadlines, set goals, set points in the process, milestones where you evaluate how much you've done and whether or not you should continue or find out what's working. And in general, what we call pre-production for game development, essentially planning out how and what you're going to make before you ever actually make it. It's all things that we're putting into practice in this next prototype, which is our next game. It's prototyping right now, which is going much smoother, I would say, than the previous one.
And smoother and faster, much faster.
Yeah, and we are ironing out as many issues or any of these tech debt or production debt, essentially, issues in Loam as we go. And that project is also going smoother over time as well, I would say. Yeah. I guess just sort of thinking into the future, are there what are you looking forward to, or what do you think we should be looking forward to in the future of XR?
Yeah, I mean, it all does kind of come down to the hardware piece of it, because how are you going to experience it without that? We are already seeing that hardware getting a lot smaller, a lot less expensive. There was a pair of glasses, and right now, of course, I'm blanking on the name of them. I got to try at Augmented World Expo last fall that already had both lenses completely with screens in them. And it really felt like a normal pair of glasses. Yes, it was tethered to a phone that was in my pocket, but that is moving in such a positive direction compared to like the HoloLens, which is giant, bulky, and gives me a headache after wearing it for 5 minutes. So I think just seeing the advances in the hardware piece will allow easier content distribution, which will kind of continue the cycle. Also on the VR side as well, I mean, you're seeing it with Oculus, of course. They ended up even not even changing the price point and doubling the storage on their base model. So I think they're really seeing what they need to do to get the hardware into as many homes as possible, as creepy as that may sound, but really having this affordable piece, because people are going to buy the software and the games, and if the person who deploys the hardware also owns the store, and this is like an Apple issue that a lot of people have a problem with, they're taking 30% of everything we make, like why wouldn't they give the hardware away? So I think just continuing to see that cycle of the hardware getting smaller and cheaper is going to be what moves us into that next evolution of the technology. I know that metaverse is a hot topic that we have talked nothing about, and I'm not even going to talk much about it because while I believe there are a lot of great ways to have a social experience in VR, and I think I saw a chat message about Facebook Horizons, and then of course there's AltSpace VR, which I love, and a few others like VR Chat and Rec Room. There are all these platforms that are being built, but if you were one of the poor souls who watched Mark Zuckerberg's speech last November, he way overpromised, and not until the end of the speech did he say, and this is what it'll be someday. So we intentionally don't bring up the metaverse unless asked about it, because it has been way overpromised and overhyped right now. I think that we of course will be moving into that direction where you can meet, like we have meetings in VR. We did it a lot during the pandemic. I play games. We have social experiences. I go to events, I host events, but it's not going to completely be ubiquitous with our society in that way that they are promising right now. So we're not trying to be pessimistic. We're just trying to temper expectations that yes, maybe someday that will happen, but it will not be as it is currently promised for a while.
Do you see any obvious bottlenecks or things that are holding back the industry from growth?
Right now, I guess our biggest challenge is the talent pipeline, and I'm sure a lot of other people in our space and many tech spaces are finding the same. And so there has been a lot of investment in education in this space. I know Meta in particular made a huge announcement about both grant programs as well as educational resources that they are investing in, so that future content producers can have the resources to be able to become those content producers. So I'm really happy that they are putting the money where their mouth is, and actually putting the investment into the talent pipeline, because without the content and the production side of it, it's not going anywhere. You're not going to buy this device unless you have something to look at through it. And so I'm glad when I see that. I know there are a lot of schools that, especially in the Metro Atlanta area, just because I'm closest with them, that have put a lot of investments and programming in to do with AR, VR, all the way from the universities down to middle, elementary, and high schools. Like we've been seeing a lot of younger people getting this in their schools for educational reasons, but also for artistic reasons. So and creative reasons. So I'm happy to see that. But I will say, and I know Pierce mentioned Unity earlier, a lot of these tools have free versions. If it's something you're truly interested in, there are so many resources to do it yourself. And employers like us, while I love to see a Georgia Tech degree on a resume, yay, Pierce, there are a lot of people that apply that have really been self-taught. They've maybe gone through some courses, but if they have a solid portfolio and do well on a coding test, like you don't have to, I feel bad saying it on this group, you don't have to have a traditional 4-year degree to do this, as long as you can, have the initiative to teach yourself and put that out in a portfolio. So So I'll say it in front of all of you. Hopefully I won't get in trouble.
Well, yeah, thank you for sharing all these thoughts and experiences with us. Now, I guess we have some time for questions still. I think I saw one that came through. Should we just go through the one that was posted, or do we have anything else? How should we approach this?
Yeah. Well, the first was a comment, and it was that they were expecting the meeting to take place in Horizon Worlds. The next question is, how long did it take for you to be the sole employee of Amebous to hire employee number 2?
Yes. So it took a lot. I felt like I couldn't do that and hire another person outside of my co-founder until I was able to commit to a full-time hire to keep them on long enough that I would like be able to continue to sell more work. Like whenever we would get smaller projects, it would just always be contractors. But that one project I mentioned with Georgia Pacific, it ended up being a 2-year-long project. And I was like, okay, I know I can hire people. We doubled the team from 2 people to 4 people in that one project, and then hired another one 6 months later to help manage it so that I could run the business and grow the business. So it did take a while. It took years to get to that point. And those 2 people, my first 2 full-time hires, still work with us now. And the one, Amy, who is now our creative director, she actually took a pay cut to work for us. She was just like believed in it so much. She's like, I know eventually this will pay off for me. Like I want to work in an environment like this. So I was pretty much just like, this is what I can offer you. And she ended up taking it. I'm really glad she did. And she's made up for it now, but it was really flattering to have someone believe in me and my ability to grow to a point, and her to see that opportunity, that she ended up taking that step with me. And I think for early employees too, and for early employees too, maybe Pierce is one of them. He was, I think, number 7, 6 or 7 or 8. It does take a lot of courage for them to accept a job with me. Like I am a small business, and while I have nice projects, like you're not working for like Amazon or Google. We don't have all of that stuff, but we try to make up for it by balancing a really good work environment, being very respectful of people's time, and also listening to their ideas and expansion of their thoughts, and trying to bring those back into growing the business. Oh, I think you're on mute.
So what else we have in here? We have, how many employees do you have now?
So we have 15 now. I actually counted before this call. I was like, I'm going to count. We've had a couple that we've had to part with over the years, but last year we actually added, I think, 5 new people to the team. So actually, no, 6 new people to the team, and we're about to potentially hire 2 more. So it's definitely growing more rapidly than it was in the past. I do think that, I guess, as my goal is not to have this like rapid, crazy scaled growth. If a product warrants it, we'll of course think about that, but we don't have like a crazy SaaS model product that we can just scale infinitely. It is very specialized what we do. And so having more of like a boutique studio agency type feel works very well for us, and we can give the attention we need to our projects. But I am excited to have now 15 people. That's very cool.
That's
Rainey, I've got a question for you. Kind of going back to the early days. You didn't actually set out to be an entrepreneur. It seems to be something that just kind of happened to you. And in early days, especially when you were basically employee number 1, you're the CEO, the CFO, the director of sales, the director of marketing, all of that. So what would you like to be able to go back to 2013 Annie and say, and would 2013 Annie listen to you?
2013 Annie may or may not listen to me, but what I would tell her is that, well, 2 things. 1, to try and outsource expertise as much as you can, because you will probably be your biggest roadblock because and I don't know, this is just how I am, but I oftentimes try to take on too much, and then I end up getting into trouble. So getting people in that I could trust, but who could also take some of that burden off of me and do a better job than I could, is something that I learned probably too late, but now I try to do it as much as I can, and also as much as financially feasible for the business. So like getting accounting off of me was like a big deal. That made me feel so free mentally, because that is like my biggest, I don't know, cloud over my head was managing the financial piece of it. And really focusing on sales has been something I like to do. It kind of energizes me. So figuring out what I like and what I don't like, and then filling in what I don't like, is something I should have realized was going to help me earlier. And then the other thing I would say is, if you have like a gut feeling on something, which I heard recently, the gut is the balance between your head and your heart. So I like that. When you have a gut feeling about something, don't just sit on it forever. I had this issue, especially when I know it's time for one of my team members to not be one of my team members anymore. Like, that was such a hard thing to deal with, because I felt like I had failed them. Maybe I wasn't managing them correctly, or maybe it was my fault they weren't performing. And eventually there's only so much you can do to try and bring someone up. They have to put in the work too. And really, I would not listen to myself. I would only listen when it got to my other team members discussing an issue with me about a particular person. And I realized, like, I would sit on these decisions for months, and I realize now that that was bad. So trusting your gut and knowing that, yeah, you probably are right, and there probably is a problem. You should act on it when you know it's a problem, not just sit on it, is a big deal.
Mhm. Good question. What other questions do we have for Annie and Pierce while we have them here? How difficult do you find it recruiting new hires and competing against larger, more established, well-known brands? Good question, Mike.
Yeah, that's a great question. Talent acquisition has been more challenging now than it was initially. And that's probably because, like, when I hired Pierce, there weren't as many companies doing this. Now there are more companies doing this, more competition. A lot of large enterprise organizations are now starting to make VR AR hires internally instead of needing to outsource to someone like us. So the talent is a little bit different as far as how we find people. Something that we've started to do, though, is leave kind of an open-ended prompt on our website. And if people find us, we've had a couple instances of this where they'll say, we're very open about, like, this is not a job posting currently, but if you like our team, like, and want to join it, we'll keep your resume on file. Like, I've now gone back to people a couple of times and actually hired them. One of our newer hires last year, Sean, ended up actually LinkedIn requesting me like a year before that. And I didn't even know it was him until he messaged me again. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I love it when people go ahead and familiarize themselves with me, so I know who they are, so I know who I can call on when the time comes. And it's worked out really well. It's saved us a lot of headache in certain circumstances, and we're doing that now as well. And also XR Atlanta, that meetup group, is very helpful, because basically anyone in Atlanta who's super into AR VR is a part of that group. And I am the manager of that group. So I can be like, hey, we're hiring, and hopefully get some resumes that way. Competing against bigger brands, I feel like we've tried to be more transparent about what we are when we are hiring. I do know that we pay better than a lot of game studios for junior level programmers. And I've heard that firsthand a couple of different times, but it is a different type of work. So we're able to do that, but so we're competitive in that way. But against the big brands, like, I feel like it's more of a personal discussion on, like, what do you want in your employment? If you want to work for a big shiny brand, like, I am not going to stop you. And I know you probably wouldn't be happy with us, but if you do want to work with a smaller group who's very close, but also is really collaborative and creative, which a lot of people prefer, then it is a fit. So I just try not to force it either way.
That's awesome. And that's tough to balance as well.
Yeah, it is
Very tough. Do we have any other questions? Anybody else want to get a last question in? We want to be thoughtful with everyone's time. We're right at the top of the hour. Going once. Going twice.
Type fast.
Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Jill. Thank you so much, Annie and Pierce. Really immensely enjoyed the conversation today and everyone joining us. I'm going to pass it over to Jill for some closing remarks.
Okay, thanks, Jen. So I'd like to thank Annie and Pierce for joining us today and sharing all of their experience with virtual reality and augmented reality, and teaching a Luddite like myself who bought her first flat screen TV in 2015, the difference between the two, and taking us through the development of Futurus and Amebous Labs in the Atlanta area. So we'd like to thank you again for joining us. You can follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn to see our upcoming events and be on our mailing list. And we'll send you an email letting you know that we've got another event planned. And we will be sending out a survey. We'd love the feedback. We've recorded this event, and so there will be a link for that as well. And I'm going to wrap it up now and thank everyone for their time, and visit our website, gtbn.org, for more information.
And connect with Annie and Pierce. Track them down and
Yes.
follow them.
Yes, definitely do. I'll put my Twitter handle in the chat.
Awesome. Make sure we share that.
There you go. I try to keep an eye on Twitter and LinkedIn, but that's a longer link to send. So find us.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you for having us. It was great
Thank
to talk
you.
to all you today.
It was fantastic.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Thanks.